Wood decay is not a natural failure of timber, but, honestly, a failure of preparation that most modern societies have quietly accepted. Across most modern environments, wood is treated as a temporary material. Fence posts rot within years, outdoor structures weaken far sooner than their design life, and even treated lumber eventually succumbs to moisture and fungi. The assumption is that this is simply how wood behaves when exposed to the elements. Yet this assumption, well, it collapses when placed alongside older construction traditions from Northern Europe. In regions where timber was not abundant but survival depended on it, wood was not treated as disposable. It was engineered for longevity using methods that required time, knowledge, and a precise understanding of decay itself. Among the most effective of these traditions were those developed in the Norse world during the Viking Age. Their ships crossed oceans, their homes endured extreme winters, and their infrastructure persisted in environments that aggressively destroyed untreated timber. The difference was not the quality of the wood itself. It was how the wood was prepared at a molecular level long before it was ever assembled into a structure. To understand why modern wood fails so quickly, it is necessary to examine what the Vikings understood about preservation that is often overlooked in simplified accounts of their seafaring reputation. The Norse understood that wood does not rot randomly, but in response to moisture pathways that can be deliberately interrupted. In the Viking Age, timber was the primary structural material for ships, dwellings, storage systems, and defensive works. The key environmental threat was not simply rain, but persistent moisture penetration combined with fungal activity. Once moisture entered the grain of the wood, biological decay followed inevitably. Norse builders addressed this not by avoiding exposure, but by altering the wood's surface chemistry. One of their most important methods was the use of pine tar, a dense, viscous substance derived from slow pyrolysis of resin-rich wood. This tar was not a decorative coating. It was a structural treatment that sealed pores, reduced water absorption, and created a barrier hostile to microbial growth. This approach was not limited to ships, although Viking longships are the most famous example. Entire coastal economies were built around tar production. Kilns were constructed to extract resin in controlled burns, and distribution networks ensured that treated timber was available for both maritime and domestic construction. Another, often overlooked technique was controlled surface charring. By lightly burning the outer layer of wood and then sealing it, builders reduced permeability and increased resistance to rot. This principle, though expressed differently across cultures, reflects a shared recognition. Decay begins at the surface, and the surface can be engineered. Entire regions were shaped by the industrial-scale production of tar, turning forests into long-term infrastructure systems. The production of tar in the Norse world was not a marginal craft. It was a significant economic activity that required labor specialization and resource planning. Pine forests were selected not only for availability, but for resin content. Earthen kilns were constructed in remote areas to control oxygen levels during slow burning, ensuring maximum tar yield. What makes this system notable is its indirect impact on settlement durability. Coastal communities that had consistent access to tar could maintain ships for decades longer than untreated vessels. Buildings in colder, inland regions where decay was slowed by climate but still present benefited from periodic reapplication of protective coatings. This created a feedback loop between environment and engineering. Rather than fighting nature with complex synthetic barriers, Norse builders worked with natural chemical processes to extend the usable life of organic materials. The result was infrastructure that could be repaired rather than replaced. This distinction is important. In a resource-limited environment, longevity is not a luxury. It is a requirement for continuity. These methods did not eliminate decay, but they extended the functional life of wood far beyond what untreated timber can achieve. Even in harsh maritime conditions, Viking ships were not disposable. Archaeological evidence suggests that vessels were routinely maintained over long periods, with hulls repeatedly treated, patched, and reinforced. This maintenance culture was as important as the original construction techniques. Homes and storage structures followed similar principles. Instead of replacing entire frames, builders focused on renewing protective layers. This approach reduced the labor burden of reconstruction and allowed communities to sustain themselves with limited timber resources. The key insight is that durability was treated as an ongoing process, not a one-time engineering achievement. Wood was not expected to resist decay indefinitely on its own. It was supported through repeated interventions that preserved its structural integrity. In modern field conditions, the same principle of controlled preservation still applies, even when expressed through different tools and materials. The underlying idea behind Viking timber preservation is not bound to ancient technology. It is a framework: control moisture, interrupt decay pathways, and reinforce structural materials before failure occurs. In contemporary outdoor work, similar principles appear in the way tools are used to prepare and maintain wood in survival or construction settings. A practical example is a compact cutting and shaping tool such as the Purple Dragon camping hatchet axe with sheath, a 14-inch hand-forged survival hatchet designed for wood chopping, splitting, and carving. In fieldcraft situations, tools of this kind are used not only to process timber, but to expose fresh wood surfaces for treatment, shaping, or controlled drying, functions that echo older maintenance cycles rather than replacing them. The continuity here is not in design, but in function. Whether using resin-based coatings in the Viking Age or modern protective treatments today, the principle remains the same. Untreated wood is temporary, but managed wood becomes infrastructure. The persistence of these techniques reveals a broader lesson about how societies adapt to environmental constraints. The Viking approach to timber was not an isolated innovation. It was part of a broader survival system that treated material science as practical knowledge rather than abstract theory. In regions where winters were long and resources limited, failure to preserve materials had immediate consequences. Modern societies often obscure this reality through industrial abundance. Wood is cheap, replacement is easy, and decay is treated as acceptable waste. But the underlying biology has not changed. Fungi, moisture, and oxygen still govern the lifespan of timber, regardless of technological context. What changes is the willingness to invest labor in prevention rather than replacement. Understanding these older methods is not about returning to the past, but about recognizing what was once considered essential knowledge. The Viking world did not rely on superior materials, it relied on superior preparation. Wood was transformed from a vulnerable organic substance into a managed resource through repeated treatment and environmental awareness. That distinction carries forward into modern survival thinking, whether in historical reconstruction, bushcraft practice, or emergency preparedness. The core challenge remains the same. Materials fail unless actively maintained. The lesson is not that ancient methods were primitive alternatives to modern ones. It is that they were responses to constraints that still exist, even if they are no longer constantly visible. The reason wood rots today is not because timber has changed, but because the discipline of preservation has been reduced to an afterthought. The Viking method was not mysterious, it was systematic, repeatable, and grounded in observation of decay itself. Understanding these practices reveals something larger about survival across time. Durability is never accidental. It is always constructed layer by layer, long before failure becomes visible. If this exploration of forgotten engineering and survival logic matters to you, subscribe to History Vault and share the video so others can see how much practical knowledge still sits beneath the surface of history.